I'm going to take you through game 3 of the World Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. So we had a repeat of the opening in game 1. A Sicilian from Carlsen, fascinating stuff. And once again, knight c6. And Fabiano went for bishop b5 again. I suspect that his team have been analysing d4 and checking up on variations, but they're not confident enough to go for it at the moment. So he's persisting with bishop b5 and this very positional variation that damages black's pawn structure just a little bit. It means there aren't many pawn breaks in the position, so manoeuvring kind of dominates here. But this is a very, very popular continuation in modern chess. And here in game 1, h3 was played, but Fabiano was ready with an improvement, castle straight away. And here, well, one could play e5 straight away. But the problem is knight f6 isn't possible because the e-pawn is on priest, and the knight doesn't stand very well on e7 because the knight doesn't really have anywhere to go from there. So Carlsen played queen c7, which is a little bit unusual, but the idea is to keep options open. You might play bishop g4, you might play knight f6, you might play e5, depending on how white reacts here. Well, Caruana played rook e1 and now e5. Now with the rook on e1, then I don't think f4 is really going to happen, not very easily. So Caruana changed his mind and went with a3, went for another plan, and b4. So this is also a very standard idea in these kind of positions. It's interesting actually, this game takes my mind back to a game in Vaikonze in 2015 between the two players. In a similar bishop b5 variation, not exactly the same. But in that game, Carlsen won with a beautiful kingside attack in an endgame. Now here, b4, an interesting moment. If black exchanges on b4, then this certainly gives white very nice play on, well, there's the semi-open a file. This structure is beautiful. And the plan is to do this. Let me just show you very quickly. So there's pressure on this pawn. The queen is going to come round to b2. If black wants to untangle, he's got to play f6, but that's not a very nice move. And at some moment, it might be possible to break with b5. Positionally, very pleasant for white. But Magnus instead played castle's kingside. Now that's interesting because, well, for a start, it offers a pawn. Now, two ways to pick this up. You could either play queen e7 with the idea that if bishop e3 you play knight g4, that's possible. Or if a4 with the idea bishop a3, then, yeah, to hold the pawn, then bishop a3. But that bishop could be rather sidelined on a3, and black certainly has compensation for the pawn. Or you could just play knight d7 here, with the idea that if bishop d3, then bishop e3, then you can actually play f5 to drive that bishop away and then take it here. It's a really sharp position. So it doesn't surprise me that Fabiano decided not to go in for that, but instead just plays knight d2. And now Magnus went for bishop g4, exchanging pieces. I was a little bit surprised about that. And one could perhaps go for knight h5, that's possible. I mean, this is also quite a dangerous move. I mean, dangerous for both sides. or maybe put the bishop, the knight back on d7 to support this pawn. But, well, he went for clarity with bishop g4. In many ways, that's so typical of his style. He wants a nice straightforward position to play. So he's connected his rooks. Pieces work pretty harmoniously together, but well, as we're about to see, white is certainly a little bit better in this position. And it's to do with the pawn structure. Well, this is a really nice pawn structure for white. Again, because there's one pawn island, black has two pawn islands, and white's pawns are in the middle. Now, Carlsen did this because he realized he could liquidate some pawns with a5, but white is definitely still better in this position. And here is where Fabiano is probably kicking himself after the game, because if he had exchanged on a5 and then played bishop d2, hitting the queen has to maintain control over e5, and queen a1, and this is very pleasant for white. Now, I'm not saying the white has a huge advantage here, definitely not, but it's a little bit uncomfortable for black, and it's the kind of position that you could look to increase your advantage. Basically, white's pieces are better than black's. Also has a structural advantage because black has two pawn islands here to white's one. There are no weaknesses in white's position. The rook is going to come over here. Maybe the queen could come to this diagonal, or maybe a3 to attack down on this diagonal. Let's put that in red, that's better. You can see that with white controlling the a file, then it's hard for black to achieve counterplay in this position. Again, I'm not saying that white has any huge advantage there, it's just that it's much easier for white to play than black. But instead, Fabiano played bishop d2. Now, if black were to exchange, then everything is fine, white is still better there. But instead, rook a8 was played by Carlsen. Good move. So black is not ceding control of the a file. And I think at this moment you could say the position is roughly level. Maybe bishop e3 here is the best move, just to control those squares that the knight could potentially move to. But Caruana played queen b4, which is a slightly odd move because the queen may get pushed back by a pawn, maybe bishop. So the game went like this, and now Magnus starts to take the initiative on the queen side. So Fabiano decided, okay, enough is enough. I'm just going to exchange off all the rooks here and steer the game towards a draw. But not so simple. Queen a7 hits the bishop, and the queen comes down. Now here, it's possible to sort of lunge in with queen d6, but Fabiano decided keep it nice and simple, just exchange queens. Here, the fact that black has two pawn islands to white's one makes no difference to the position at all. And the kings started to travel into the middle of the board. But black is slightly better here because the knight is able to reach a beautiful square e6, looking at these outposts. Now here, Fabiano has a difficult position. Do you stick or do you twist? Do you just sit on the position and hope that, well, there are no real weaknesses for white here, and hope that black can't break through? Or do you break out? Well, the breakout move here would be d4. And these exchanges are very plausible. And with best play, should be a draw. However, I can understand why he was reluctant to do this, because black has a queenside pawn majority. Still should be a draw though. So instead, he just went bishop c3. But now this is certainly more pleasant for black. And again, another moment where it's possible to break with d4, but with black having that pawn majority, still a little bit uncomfortable. In any case, knight d2 played. Here's an interesting moment. Carlsen just played knight g5, attacking the pawn. Pawn advanced, and he came back again. So what's that about? Well, it could be that sometimes you could get in g5 and force an exchange and get a passed pawn. It might be that after this advance, at some moment, then this could be weakened. So it's an interesting idea. But for the moment, the action is on the queenside. Black is starting the squeeze, and we know that Magnus is so good in these kind of positions where you just have a pleasant space advantage and you're squeezing away. But Fabiano was pretty cool here. He just sat tight and didn't panic. And now black has a choice. Do you play g5? Do you play f5? Well, if g5, of course, it would be a mistake to capture like this, giving black an outside pawn. But of course, white can just sit there, and then after the exchange, well, it's actually not too bad. It's very hard for white to attack that h pawn. Carlsen played f5. Caruana just sat there. F4 probably doesn't make any difference. The bishop just drops. No harm done. So Carlsen exchanged on e4, and he said afterwards that he was keen to provoke a crisis round about the time control. He said roughly that at any rate. So we're on move 38 here. That's Caruana's 39th move. And basically Carlsen thought, my best chance of winning this game is to gamble, to play a quick move, play an active move. And Caruana has, quite a fundamental decision to make on the 40th move when he had, from memory, something like just over 5 minutes left. So not serious time pressure as such, but when you have to make a fundamental decision that changes the nature of the position, then that's added pressure. So this was Magnus's reasoning behind playing this line. In fact, if that knight hits d3, then black has something to play for. But instead, Fabiano on the 40th move very confidently exchanged and just played king e2. And in fact, there's no way for black to make progress here. If, well, let's say bishop b6, maybe with this idea, then in fact this king and pawn endgame is really no problem for white at all. So in this position, instead of playing bishop b6, Magnus just created a passed pawn straight away, and now it's a really simple draw. First of all, knight e3, king protects the pawn, and f4. Pawns are exchanged. Of course, every pawn exchange brings white closer to a draw. And now f5. Pawn takes pawn. Of course, it's possible to recapture that with either pawn or knight, but instead Caruana decided, okay, I've had enough of this game. Let's just cut to a theoretical draw, theoretically drawn position. So he gave up the piece and took on f5. And this is a dead draw because this king is going to sit here and there's no way it can be budged. For example, so let's clear up those last 2 pawns, and white can't prevent this, of course. So let's just play through these moves. White is just waiting. So this is a very, very well known theoretical position where in spite of having an extra piece and a pawn, it's impossible for black to get anywhere, because it's impossible to drive the king out of the corner. This obviously gets you nowhere whatsoever. And if bishop b6 check, the king goes back into the corner, and well, if black waits, then that's actually a draw by stalemate. Otherwise, the bishop has to move away, but then the king just steps aside. And theoretical draw, the wrong coloured bishop. So there we are. Well, there were some interesting moments there. After the game, when I asked both players, were they satisfied with the outcome of the game? Well, Magnus said nope. And I can understand that, because he realised that he could have been under serious pressure if we come back here. This is uncomfortable for black, actually. Fabiano also, well, it's a little bit disappointing for him, because I suspect that a lot of this was preparation. And I don't know, maybe that's pushing things a bit. But of course, he will have looked at this general type of position and realised that he was doing absolutely fine. So I think bishop d2 is a little bit careless, and rook takes rook would have guaranteed him a pleasant advantage. Yeah, neither side can be completely satisfied. Nevertheless, they've had 3 draws, and it's still very early stages in this World Championship match. Magnus has white in the next game. Be interesting to see how hard he pushes there, and indeed what opening comes on the board. In the meantime, do check out the World Championship playlist up there, and indeed all the other playlists between Carlsen and Caruana. Games where they've played, and I've recorded a video on their games. And if you'd like to support the channel, don't forget patreon.com PowerPlayChess. You'll find the link up there. Or you can make one-off donations on PayPal if you so choose, and we'd be very grateful for those as well. Thanks very much for watching.